It is that time of the week again here, and that means we're making some fantasy football trades ahead of Week 3 NFL action. With 2 games in the books now for every NFL team, it's time to take a step forward here and now assess some players that I think have some changing dynamics here, or maybe there's something in their situation that I think is lowering their stock price that shouldn't be doing so. Whatever the case might be, we're going to dive into all that stuff and more today and talk through 5 wide receivers I'm buying here ahead of Week 3 fantasy football. Of course, as always, if you're new around here, drop down, smash that subscribe button, and turn the bell on. The faster you guys get here, the better chance I can respond to your questions, of course. As always, too, you guys can help each other out as well. So if you see a question that you got a pretty good feel for, feel free to answer that. I might answer both of you. I might give my thoughts on, the question and whoever responded. All that stuff is welcome. I want to have this be one of the most interactive, if not the most interactive fantasy channel and community on YouTube and in every platform and space that we're in. So take advantage of that, you guys. I want to be a tool and a resource here for you this season. So make sure to leave those questions and comments down there for me. Smash that like button before we get started, and let's jump into our first of 5 wideouts here for today's video. Alrighty, here we go. So diving into our first player, I said this and prefaced this in the last trade episode I recorded. I recorded the running back segment for buys this week prior to this video. I've got 2 more to go here today, so go check out those videos. Those will be sell episodes if you have not done so already. I'm dropping them all at the same time, so maybe you're coming from one of those episodes, but we're putting some higher caliber players in the video today because I do think there are some legitimate opportunities. I tried to stay away from these guys the first couple weeks of the season because I know it's tough to trade for guys that have those quote-unquote price tags attached to them for fantasy football here. So I didn't want to put that on you guys. Like, you want to be buying players at a value in week 1 and week 2. Guys like a Christian Kirk, who, hadn't broken out yet and hadn't had this awesome aura of fantasy ceiling associated with him. Now that that's kind of worn off here and that we're starting to see the cream rise to the top here, if you will, and the actual legitimate players for the season start to do their damage, some of the guys who I still think are going to do that but haven't been necessarily fulfilling their highest potential, we'll be talking about them. So that leaves us with Deebo Samuel here to start this video off with today. Why Deebo Samuel? He actually has not had a bad game yet this season. However, he also hasn't scored more than 11.5 points in half PPR scoring in either of his opening 2 contests. Now, plain and simple, I think the primary reason for this is one, Trey Lance. I am very sorry for Trey Lance, the person. I hate the injury. I hate watching players get injured because, that's their livelihood and ultimately the worst thing that could happen in the world. So never cheering for an injury. I would absolutely never wish upon someone's fantasy player, even if I was, up 10 in a Monday Night Football game and it was just their player left, not wishing injury upon any soul. So the reason, though, that I think that his presence in this offense changed things is because, plain and simple, the offense was entirely different than it was under a Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, there's various similarities to an extent here, but ultimately, you've got quarterback run packages, which were not a factor with Jimmy G in the offense. You've got a situation where you've got more of a downfield passing offense. At times, we didn't really get to see it unlocked here because of poor weather in a small sample size in week 2, but you understand what I mean. This team was willing to let the ball rip downfield a little bit more, at least we expected they would have been able to. That should have favored Brandin Ayuk in theory here, and now with the ankle injury, it sounds like it was a fractured fibula and maybe a dislocation of some stuff. I forgot what the exact report was, but moral of the story, he is out for the foreseeable future, likely the entirety of the 2022 season, and now we're back to Jimmy G here for the rest of the year. And Jimmy G was the orchestrator of last year's top 5 wide receiver finisher, the one and only wide back, Mr. Deebo Samuel. So I love it. I think it's going to go back to elite level numbers here. The one issue that we could see is with these running back injuries and the lack of efficiency that we saw from, Jeff Wilson Jr. had himself a respectable game last week. I don't want to beat around the bush with that. He had over 100 yards from scrimmage, didn't find the end zone, but he was pretty solid. I do think that if they get overly running back dependent on Deebo, which is something they used especially a lot in week 1 in that terrible monsoon game, that could be a little bit limiting for him here. But what I love and what I really hope this team taps into here is the screen game and the line of scrimmage passing. Get Deebo in space, not running between the numbers, get him out wide with perimeter blocking. Once George Kittle comes back, having him in open field space, making dudes fall on their butts here will be a huge addition and asset for Deebo Samuel's fantasy value. I can't tell you enough how I think the tides just swung right back into his favor in terms of being easily a top 5 or 6 fantasy receiver the rest of the season. And those ceiling numbers, that type of production is just something we haven't seen here the first couple weeks of the year. So I'm really thinking you can get back to that. If you can offer somebody that, maybe has some inflated stock right now, go check out that sales episode or just drop your comments in your questions rather in the comment section below. You, of course, are welcome to do that. But I do think there is an opportunity to buy at a lower price than we're typically used to seeing here because that ceiling hasn't been realized yet, because these Jimmy G games, these game plans we saw for an entire season last year where Deebo dominated are now on the table and something that we can obviously project here going forward just based off of what we saw last season. Ceedee Lamb is the next wide receiver here. I wanted to talk about him last week. I did want to see one game first, though, and for those who held Ceedee Lamb, maybe they couldn't find the deal they were looking for last week. He had a respectable performance here. 7 receptions, 75 yards, no scores, but still had himself, again, a serviceable lineup game here. For those who are now thinking they can move off of him for a respectable price, take advantage of that value. Ceedee Lamb is still the alpha dog for this offense. Noah Brown had a great game, not disputing that, but Michael Gallup's coming back here hopefully pretty soon. That should open up some doors for Ceedee Lamb, maybe not seeing nearly as tight of coverage. And plain and simple here, Cooper Rush has some stones on him. This guy is not afraid to let the football rip and throw the ball downfield and let his playmakers go up and make grabs. Big spots in the game, arguably the first down of the game, double covered against Cincinnati. Ceedee Lamb runs a 8 to 10 yard out route. Cooper Rush throws him the football, and it's basically game over, and you get a situation where they set up that game-winning field goal. So his usage is not a worry for me. Will there be some inconsistencies? Will he have some bust games here? Probably. But you still got a window of time here between now and the time that Dak Prescott returns where Ceedee Lamb owners are going to be losing their mind. They're not going to trust what Cooper Rush can deliver for this offense. They're going to hit the panic button, and they're going to try and sell him for whatever value they can get in return, the best offer available. So be that team. Be that player that goes out and makes a potentially league-winning acquisition down the stretch of the season when Dak Prescott comes back, because you've got a guy who's had 11 targets in back-to-back games, 22 targets on the season, and should put up some continually great numbers in terms of volume on a week in and week out basis. So next up, moving into a slightly less high ticket item here in terms of Brandin Cooks and his fantasy value for this season. I love Brandin Cooks though. His fantasy value continually, year in, year out. It's like that one thing you just depend on every season. He's going to be underrated in the in the fantasy football draft season. Every year we let him fly under the radar. Every year he comes out here and seemingly delivers a better value than what we invested into him on draft day. And I still see that being the case here moving into week 3. He's had double-digit targets in each game this season, 12 in week 1, 10 in week 2. And this is a feisty Texans team. They've been keeping up with teams, keeping games close. Davis Mills had himself some struggles this week. It wasn't the prettiest football game from the Broncos or the Texans. It was kind of a nitty-gritty defensive war here. Christian Kirksey, my former Packers linebacker, went up and snagged a pass from Russell Wilson down the middle of the seam. And I think it was intended for Cortland Sutton. But overall, it was just an ugly football game. I think the Texans, I talked about this in the running back buys episode, I think they need to run the ball a little bit more. I think they need to stay a little bit more balanced and not lean so heavily on Davis Mills. But it's shown up great in the, just checking off boxes in the target volume department here for Brandin Cooks. And this is a player who left a lot hanging on the table in week 2. A player who dropped a walk-in touchdown reception. Should have been 6 more points for him. Has had other plays that didn't quite result in the, expected outcome for what should have happened in that situation. So Cooks, for me, as a vertical weapon, checks the box. He can stretch the field, make splash plays for you. Volume, again, check that box as well. This is a legitimate fantasy football wide receiver too that I believe will finish as a top 24 play this season, of course, if he stays healthy and if he continues getting red zone looks, if he continues being the clear-cut favorite target for Davis Mills in this Houston passing offense, he will keep putting up points and he will continue to be a very viable lineup threat. Again, had himself a significant amount of missing fantasy points here from Week 2's game against the Denver Broncos in what was a tough matchup against a defense that played pretty well considering the circumstances. So that leaves us into our next situation here with Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a player who is hurt right now. We don't necessarily have extended tape or footage on him, but I'm buying low on the opportunity that this injury provides for us. He's coming off an ACL, but he looked good in the quarter or so that he played against the Dallas Cowboys. Three of three targets were converted into receptions for 35 yards, and they got him the football extremely early in that game. This offense needs Chris Godwin in order to maximize its potential and be the best version that Tampa Bay Bucs roster here in 2022 can be. TB12 needs a safety blanket. He needs a guy that can get off the line of scrimmage quick, attack the middle of the field, sit down in zone coverage, and get yards after the catch. That is literally Chris Godwin. So once he comes back, he will be more than a welcome sight for this offense. This is a player that I think is a very high floor play in PPR formats every single game that he's healthy and available to get on the field. And the injury he sustained against Dallas was not a knee issue. It was a hamstring strain. Those suck. If you're playing with the hamstring strain, you're not necessarily playing anywhere close to 100%, but I hope this team gives him the chance to get healthy before they put him back out there, trust his body, and go to work, because he's a dang good football player. If he didn't have the ACL injury, he would not have been a 6th-round pick in draft season this year, and this is obviously a situation that I think only gives you a return on investment if you have the depth to be able to overcome this injury and acquiring this issue for your team the rest of this season. So Chris Godwin, an absolute dog here, our 4th must buy wide receiver here for Week 3. And then finally, wait a minute, what? It's Kyle Pitts. Yes, we're tossing a tight end into the wide receivers episode. I could not help myself. I actually found that, the majority of the wideouts that I love for this fantasy season friggin' balled out this week. So there wasn't really a buy low, quote unquote, if you will. Now, this isn't all centered around buy low candidates because, again, guys like Deebo Samuel and Ceedee Lamb, they have that name value attached to them. So they're going to come at a bit of a higher price regardless, as will Kyle Pitts being a 3rd-round pick. But I had to talk about him here. I've been getting a lot of questions. What do I do with Kyle Pitts? What's the situation? This, that, the other thing. I hate it for you guys. I've got Kyle Pitts shares myself. It is insanely and incredibly frustrating, especially, you guys are calling Nathaniel Hackett, maybe not you guys specifically, but the NFL meme community, let's put it out there like that. They're calling Nathaniel Hackett a thumb. They're making fun of him and all this, calling him, the worst play caller in the league, just kind of in over his skis, all that. What about Arthur Smith? This guy has a top 4 overall pick at the tight end position, and he's literally not getting him the football. He had 7 targets week 1, which is great. That target volume is something that we can definitely live with here. But he has 4 total fantasy points in half PPR scoring in 2 games played. He has 4 total receptions and 38 total yards. Not cool. After the game as well, he goes, we're playing football, not fantasy football. Well, maybe Arthur Smith, there is a time and a place where those two things kind of interlock themselves and actually, coexist. Having a good offense means you have a good football team. Kyle Pitts is easily, this offense needs to be so centralized and predicated on the Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Cordell Pattersons of the world, and they did not, frankly, get the ball to CPAT or Kyle Pitts enough this week. You wonder why you were down 28-3 in the 3rd quarter. It's because you're not playing good offense, you're not playing efficient football, and you're not getting your best playmakers the ball in their hands. So they have to fix and correct this issue. You can't have a guy this fast, this big, this talented. He is such a weapon on the field. He needs touches. He is the most gifted tight end in the National Football League, and I do not have any second questions about saying that statement. Yeah, are Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce at this point in time miles ahead of him in the fantasy football game? Of course they are, because Kyle Pitts has busted 2 weeks in a row. He's a guy who had 1 receiving touchdown last year, despite his awesome 1,000-yard start to his career. They have to give him the ball more. He has more physical gifts than they do. He's better after the catch. He has the size. He checks every single box except for getting like warranted looks. Give him something in the red zone, underneath, draw up plays for him. That's my rant. There you have it. Buy low for Kyle Pitts. I promise you, tight end, as it is in a normal situation, is one of the most easy positions to give up on in fantasy football. You'll see players panicking at the tight end spot way more frequently than any other position group. There are players in your league currently, with soiled pants trying to figure out what to do with Kyle Pitts. Go find that person in your league, make them a trade offer. You might just have yourself a deal. And a player this week against Seattle, I think, is a strong breakout candidate for this week's games. No Jamal Adams. I talk about Jamal Adams as much as he is a meme in his own right. Has interceptions bouncing off his face mask and doinking off other parts of his body. Him and Derwin James are two of the most solid defenders of the tight end position. Jamal will get burned here and there, but he's gone. Don't even have to worry about him. He is out for the season. That Seattle defense is extremely undermanned. They played well schematically week 1. We saw the 49ers roll over them last week. Ross Dwelly had a long touchdown reception. Imagine what Kyle Pitts can do this week in the upside he has for lineups here in week 3. So there you have it. To recap our 5 must-buy wide receivers, the reason I tossed Kyle Pitts in this episode is because, of course, he is a tight end, so pass-catching position, and, of course, he plays a flexed-out tight end role as well, so something interesting to consume there as well. The last point I wanted to make bashing Arthur Smith is that in week 1, this analytic is not out for week 2 at the time of recording this episode, but for week 1, Kyle Pitts had just a 57.6 route participation. That is dumb. If you're keeping Kyle Pitts into block, what are you doing? That is not where his skill set is best suited, and that is not the best way to contribute to your football team. So flex him out wide, give him a freaking 100% route participation number, and, if you're throwing the football, give this guy a pattern to run because he'll probably get open. And even if he's not, he is just longer, taller, and faster and can moss the heck out of somebody. So, to recap, Deebo Samuel, Ceedee Lamb, Brandin Cooks, Chris Godwin, Kyle Pitts. Go make an offer for him in your leagues. Guys to buy low on for this week. And, of course, take advantage and reap the rewards the rest of this football season. Thank you guys so much. Of course, as always, if you have questions, put them in the comment section below. Remember, you are, of course, welcome to answer other people's questions. And as I said, I'll get back to as many of you as I possibly can. So have that bell on so whenever I post a video in the future, you can get in there and ask me your questions really, really fast. And we'll have a great fantasy week here in week 3. Crush our leagues, and of course, chalk up those W's in the win column for week 3 fantasy football. Thanks so much again, you guys. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.